The right really wants you to use their terminology, especially the terminology around DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. In the right-wing fantasy world that they live in, this can mean anything from resegregation to a stand-in for literal racial slurs. When people like Donald Trump and JD Vance are trying to blame literal plane crashes on diversity hiring, you have to understand they are just using it as a way to push their racial points of view. In their minds, the only actual qualified person ever is a white, straight man. And this is why this attack upon diversity is so important, because it presents the idea that innately all people that aren't straight white dudes are innately unqualified or had to have some unfair amount of help to get where they are. And this is very important to understand. When they're saying this, they're talking about women too. You know, the majority of the population in both the US and the globe. When they're talking about ending diversity, they're talking about resegregation, something that only ended in the US during my mother's lifetime. And anyone who has spent even a moment of studying any of these things knows that there is immense discrimination in every single governmental system. This is why we have to do so much effort to try to make things not discriminatory, whether they're being discriminatory towards disabled people, women, minorities, religious minorities, other marginalized groups, queer people. We have to have things in our society to make sure that people are not discriminated against and equality and equity is fostered. This isn't perfect, and oftentimes when it's happening with corporate companies, it's really just to pretend like they're actually doing something, but the reality is those problems exist because these are countries that until very recently had actual literal segregation policies as part of national policy. So when they're talking about NDEI or being anti-DEI, they are being pro-segregation and anti-marginalized people, including women who make up the majority of people. And if you know your history, you know terms like DEI and diversity are now being used by the right in the same way that anti-Semitism in the first wave of fascism used Jewish people and the left in a grand conspiracy theory to push all of their own insane views of the world and discrimination that led ultimately to the deaths of millions. And considering Trump said that if he lost in 2024, it would be a result of Jewish people not supporting him enough, that shouldn't shock you. They're not anti-DEI, they're pro-segregationists, and that is how it needs to be framed. Don't fall into the trick of the far right by using their terms to describe all of politics.